This devlog, we're going to improve my workflow for designing places in the overworld. Previously, they were made with this really nasty code approach. Now, I've got actual proper tools to be able to design all this stuff. And I've also managed to get all those improvements to my asset pipeline that I was talking about last week finished, so I'll talk about that a bit later. This is a game about exploration and discovery in a fantasy world. You collect things, kill monsters, level up, and discover strange settlements, just like what I'm making here. So the way I was doing towns and even things like the goblin campsites before was placing all the meshes using only code. This quickly hit a wall though, as it was just really inefficient to edit them, and if you really want to make some cool stuff, it's just not really feasible. So because of this, I went and hatched a plan to get my level editor involved. Essentially the way I can do visited places is with one of these scene files, which just tells it where to put all the stuff. And really what I want is a version of this that can be put into the overworld, but that doesn't really rely on, like having a terrain file or like a blend file or anything like that. It's kind of like in the case of the goblin campsite, I just place a few different things around the scene. But this is just really inefficient because having to define all this stuff in code just doesn't really, it doesn't really cut it. It's much easier to design stuff outside of code, like actually in an editor. So that's going to be the job for today. So I started making my scene editor aware of the overworld places and what they actually were. The way this works is just that you have a designated place name and it reads and writes the files to a designated places directory from there. Everything else is really just basic scene tree editing, with a few of the other pieces disabled. So essentially this is not a map, it's a place, and you can see because I've disabled some of the things like the tile grid. So something like this with this house and this flower, then you can see I've got my house and I've got my little plant pot in front of it. So this is essentially that entire scene just then transposed onto the world. With the basics in place, it was time to make some slightly more complicated towns. Oh, look at that. I know the trees are getting in the way, but I mean that actually looks like an actual thing, rather than the other week where I was just like sticking them all over the place. That's nice. I mean, overlooking the fact that it needs obvious improvement, such as removing the trees. But other than that, I'm happy with it. Let's commit that and do something else. But before I do that... Yay! Printer may be out of ink. I don't think so. I need to figure out how to get collision radiuses or that sort of thing into the editor anyway. It's getting late, but I'm kind of working on getting some of this place logic working. So one of the main things I've got working with it is that the collision system now seems to be working, which is very nice indeed. So if this is our place in the testing world, boop. Hey. So the way I'm doing this is I'm using just user data again. So basically when you go to insert the scene, you also give it the collision detection world now. And then this reads that in and then knows how to do some other stuff with it. Essentially, I do have a little bit of an indicator of what it looks like. So you can see the collider there if I just move it. So it's just a little ring-a-rooney. But I'm going to get around to making it look a bit more kind of presentable after a little while. But that is, essentially what the radius is. Oh, actually, yeah, there's a bug. So the places are actually spawning over here at the moment. I don't know why, but the collision does still work if I swim up to it. So one of the main things I need to do is get squares because this is a circle and that's a square. And if I want to have a rotated house, which I probably do, then that's going to be actually really annoying to figure out. So I might just avoid that for now. Also, why don't I just figure out what the houses are being put there while I'm here? Okay, I think it was inserting it into the wrong scene node. Yeah, okay, can't see it anymore. That's good. Right, there it is. Very nice. Now, at the start of this week, I spent quite a bit of time trying to get models exported via layers working. While it took longer than I hoped, here's how I did it. So I think I might have actually got somewhere with the export pipeline. It took way too long though. It took much longer than I thought it would take. So essentially what I'm trying to do is if you have your voxel art like this, I'd like to be able to individually select some of these different structures for exporting. So the way I've decided to do that is just using layers. So I can show and hide things like that because it's on a separate layer. Now what the asset tool previously did was it went through and just would have exported every single mesh that's on that screen at the moment. That was of course not what I wanted. So I've had to modify the asset pipeline a lot in order to be able to facilitate a lot of that stuff. And I've also had to modify the voxel tool because one of the big problems was that if the center of the map was like over here somewhere, then that meant that when I came to export this, the mesh itself would be totally off center from where the origin was. So I had to deal with all of that sort of stuff. That's now being done in the asset pipeline. So I've got this auto center class, which is responsible for actually like centerizing the mesh itself. So it's things like you had to actually figure out the shift value itself and then be able to recalculate everything for the arrays and then actually pass off these values as well, which essentially are like the bounding boxes. It all took a long time. But if we run the game, then we can see, look, I'm now in the center of it. So I'm using this tree just to work out where the actual absolute origin of the world is. And it's pretty much bang down the middle of where this model actually is. And in theory, if I was to do something like this, so take this, move it over here, and maybe just to demonstrate it is the new one, if I add a bit of stuff to it. Now if I start it again, I should get my modified thing still at the center with the voxels changed. And it is, look at that. That's great. It'll detect that the file's changed and rebuild it. Now I should get Temple 2 here, which I do. So I've got my Vox mesh, but I do need to run it again from here, so it's got the flag applied. Oh, this is going to be really useful, I can already tell. Because like it's such a benefit to not have to think about like, oh, I've got to make a different file for this, and oh, I've got to center it, and that stuff used to take me a while before, so I think this is going to be a really good workflow. It's like every time I made like a chest of drawers, I used to have to figure out where the middle of it was. So if we look at where my cursor is now, it's 0, 0, so it had to be in the very center. Now the tool can also do that, is really nice. So that's it for this week. Again, it was probably a bit more tooling than I would have liked, but we're getting there. Also, I wasn't in my cozy setup for most of it, so oh my god, I've just used the word cozy in the context of a game devlog. What's happened to me? But anyway, I did still get quite a lot done this week. If you're in a place where you'd like to know a little bit more about how I do places, then watch this video, where I talk about places.